Hello everyone, my name is Fred, and I'm your host in this segment. If you're new to our channel, subscribe now because we upload videos that can help in your wealth building. Today, we are going to talk about Chamath Palihapitiya's opinion that will take place over the next 15 days and more. So, let's get started. The world economy is heating up, particularly as a result of the free money injected by governments during the pandemic outbreak. The prices of commodities, assets, and everything else traded in the economy have increased as a result of this free money. The situation has gotten worse since the Russia-Ukraine war. As a result, a recession is imminent in the overheated global economy. Inflation in the US has reached its highest level in 40 years. Additionally, the Fed has announced a 75 basis point increase in interest rates to combat the spike in inflation. International organizations are now raising the alarm about the slowdown in the economy. The IMF once again lowered its forecast for world growth. On the All In podcast with David Sachs, Chamath Palihapitiya discussed these worries and anxieties. According to Chamath, this is the beginning of the situation that we have warned about, and anyone who believes that the economy will return to normal in the coming days, weeks, or even 6 months is mistaken. In the ensuing 18 to 36 months, he predicts that inflated asset prices will settle down to their actual level. Chamath has also criticized the modern monetary theory, which holds that by printing money and injecting it into the economy, economists can maintain a stable economy. They are purposefully denying reality if they haven't observed the effects of money printing during the pandemic outbreak. David Sachs agreed with Chamath's point of view that the worst is not going to end soon, but rather it will take years to get it normalized. David pointed out the housing prices, which have surpassed historic highs and are making the economic situation worse. The financial markets are in the utter disarray. The dollar has fallen 17% and the S&P is down 21% so far this year. That is not indicative of what happened to growth stocks at the same time, as Sachs has noted. The CPI for May increased and was $8.6. We also got a 75 basis point rate hike. Let's hear what Chamath has to say about his analyses and reasoning. But before that, let's take a second for you to smash the like button and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done it yet.
The thing that you have to do before you talk about what is happening now, I think it's probably useful to go back, and you have to really start at the end of the great financial crisis. And the reason is there was a bunch of people coming out of the GFC who confused what the US government and some European governments were doing. At the time, there was the risk of a huge financial contagion. And so the US stepped in and the Federal Reserve started to use their balance sheet to buy toxic assets, right? And the ECB did that, and I think Japan did that as well. Anyways, a bunch of banks did it. A bunch of governments did it. And then there was this body of pseudoscientific economists who coined this thing called modern monetary theory, which basically said, hey, you can keep printing money and introducing it into the economy to smooth things out and to actually drive long-term growth. And it turns out that a bunch of government officials fell for it. And if you fast forward to 2022, so 14 years later, governments around the world had printed something to the tune of about 35 odd trillion dollars of money into the economy that should have never been there. So the thing to remember is we have not necessarily just been obfuscating true supply demand in the last 6 or 8 months when we've been talking about a recession or inflation. We've been actually doing it since 2008. It's just that it's been building up in the system. So one of the things that we have to realize is that all of that money somehow needs to get destroyed in some way, shape, or form if the true economic equilibrium is meant to be found. What is true supply? What is true demand in the absence of government sloshing money around trying to prop up things that should not be propped up, or buying votes, or all the grifts that these folks have engaged in the last, decade and a half have to get undone. So that's the backdrop. So if you think about taking $30 trillion out of the global economy, you're talking about almost, I think it's 85 trillion is the world GDP. So it's almost half of an entire year's worth of global GDP. It's going to take 3 years probably of the slow, meticulous, running off of money, not reintroducing new money. So it seems like we're at the beginning of something that's going to be long and drawn out. Now that's separate from whether we're in a recession or not. That's just the bear market that we're in, right? And so you have to look at asset prices today as a microcosm of a much larger trend that has to be about fake money pushing asset prices up, and now taking all that fake money out and finding out what the real price of something is. And I just don't think that takes 6 months. So for all the people that were, fingers crossed, hoping that this would be the end of it, Fed raises 75, we're done with this, they're going to raise 75 more. I just think that's not how it's probably going to be. It's going to take, 24, 36 months. That may mean the bottom doesn't happen for another 18 months. So I think we're in for a lot of choppy market action.
3 asset bubbles are all being impacted. We had stocks. It looks like that the story was pretty violent. Then we had crypto. Regarding that asset bubble, the last 2 or 3 weeks have been completely insane. And now that there are record high housing inventories, record home sales are now falling below the average of the previous 20 years, and mortgage origination is collapsing. For some people, it was 2 points just a few months ago, and perhaps another 18 months will observe even more depreciation in this. Or do you believe that we acted in such a crazy manner that it fell so violently that we are now bouncing along the bottom? Now, let's hear from David Sachs on what's his opinion.
Well, the stock market, especially growth stocks, may have taken the majority of the carnage, but you're right, there are other asset classes, and I think we're going to see the carnage start to rotate into those. So you're right, if you look at residential real estate now, the prices are at the highest they've been relative to median income since something like 2006, 2007, before that sort of great real estate crash that precipitated the Great Recession of 2008. So I think there are going to be more shoes to drop. I just want to build on Chamath's point about root causes here. Milton Friedman once said that there's nothing quite so permanent as a temporary government program. The temporary government program was quantitative easing. We had this Great Recession of 2008 that could have turned into a depression. They broke the glass in case of emergency. They started this QE, which is basically the government intervening to buy bonds in the market. They had never done that before, and they loaded up their balance sheet. The crazy thing is that program was still continuing until last year. Why? I mean, it was like on cruise control. And so last year,
it was continuing until last month, and countries Europe are still doing it. 9% inflation in Europe, and they're still buying bonds.
Right. So you go back to last year, the Fed bought 54% of the government's debt, despite the fact that the economy was growing at like 5% GDP, that it was bouncing back really strongly from COVID, that you had the stock market at all-time highs, and yet they were still intervening with this massive QE. And then when we got the surprise 5.1% inflation print last summer, they didn't stop QE till the end of Q1. So you're right, they kept basically printing money, and it's still going on, and that's created massive distortions in the economy. Now, so the Fed, I would say, is the number one culprit here, and Jay Powell is the number one culprit, but the number two culprit is the Biden administration. And I think Biden did 3 things very early on in the first few months of his presidency to effectively tank his presidency. Number one, he canceled our energy independence on his first day in office, canceling the Keystone Pipeline and making it much harder to drill. And of course, energy inflation is the number one factor in this sort of overall inflation. Number two, he pushed through that last $2 trillion of stimulus on straight party lines, the ARP, the American Rescue Plan, after Larry Summers said, economists in his own party said, this is going to create inflation, don't do it. And then the third thing is, and no one really talks about this, is that Biden could have used diplomacy in 2021 to basically find an off-ramp to this Ukraine crisis before it turned into a full-fledged war.
And that's a wrap for today's video. So what's your opinion? Do you agree with Chamath and David? Leave a comment on this because we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you find value in our segment today, please give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing to be notified whenever we upload informative videos like this. Once again, I'm Fred, and thank you for watching until the end. I'll see you on our next video here at Investing Wise Academy.